These are some of the most disturbing and gut-wrenching true stories ever posted to the internet. I've personally gone through hundreds of Reddit posts to bring you only the most horrifying and unexpected stories. Some of these are so extreme that Reddit has tried to wipe them from the internet. So as always, viewer discretion is highly advised. Cooked alive. There's just something so innately evil about people wanting to hurt children. Occasionally doing something irresponsible on accident is normal, it happens to everyone, but being deliberately negligent toward them just out of pure malice is instantly jail behavior and should be treated as such. On the subreddit Let's Not Meet, a user by the name of Bobby Brown 666420 shared an absolutely horrific story about her being locked inside a sauna as a kid and almost being cooked alive. While it sounds disturbing already, the context behind it makes it even more unsettling. Opie starts off by telling others about her and her cousin's trip to the YMCA as a 10-year-old. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so that we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times, and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won. But instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off, or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking/twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard 2 little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been sitting there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little. My cousin was lying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposefully locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire, and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way, and I immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back in. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before my grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner, and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating, and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her end game? I'm 21, but I still think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding, or do you think that she really just left us in there to die, and why? So, to the lifeguard of that YMCA, please, let's not meet again. Even after all this time, OP says she still thinks about what happened in that sauna. She still wonders what the lifeguard's goal really was. What would have happened if that man hadn't shown up? It becomes especially strange when you consider how the lifeguard didn't even seem worried about the consequences, because realistically, if OP and her cousin had passed out or worse, it would have been impossible to cover up. She would have been the one responsible. There was no way around that. But for some reason, her indifference, or maybe her malice toward these two kids, seems stronger than any fear of being caught. Some commenters did bring up the issue of the sauna having a lock. A few questions how that was possible, since it isn't legal in the US for sauna doors to lock from the outside. That did make people second-guess the story for a moment, but OP followed up in the comments with photos of similar locks from the same facility. She also later posted a small update saying that she brought up the incident with her cousin again, and her cousin remembered it clearly, laughed about it now, but admitted that at the time it was just as disturbing for her as it was for OP. OP also contacted the same YMCA recently to ask if the sauna still had locks on the door. According to her, it no longer does. So whether it was removed because of this or for some other reason, it's clear that whatever happened wasn't completely in her head. Still, it's hard to wrap your head around how someone could sit just a few feet away and ignore two kids desperately trying to get out. And no matter how much time passes, it doesn't make that feel any less real. Let go of me. It's fairly normal for parents to worry about their children on planes. They're energetic, fussy, and are very unpredictable. In other words, traveling with a child is already stressful, but having to deal with a full-blown confrontation with an adult who crosses way too many lines is not normal. As told by Reddit user CA Mommy Dear on the subreddit Let's Not Meet. OP was a frequent flyer who had traveled alone with her 1-year-old son a dozen times before without any problem. She described her baby as a generally calm child who was used to traveling considering how often they did it. She further clarifies that she's very social and is perfectly okay with interacting with strangers, but then she recalls how one flight and one bad interaction gave her a fear of flying for life. I've flown with my 1-year-old solo nearly a dozen times. Usually people are understanding and kind about me having a baby on my lap, and overall, he's a happy, easy baby. He's also very cute, so it's not uncommon for strangers to talk to him. Usually I don't mind. The last trip I took, I sat alone in my aisle with a man sitting by himself directly behind me. My baby was tired and fussing. I knew he was tired, but there's not a lot I could do until after we took off. Right out the gate, the man behind was talking to my baby, saying, "Oh, hi, baby. Why sad, baby? Cute, cute, baby." I smiled and replied that he was tired, sorry for the fuss, thank you. After takeoff, I started to get him settled for a nap. The man behind us continued to talk to my baby, putting his hand through the seats to try and grab his feet. Multiple times I asked him nicely to please stop. My baby was tired, you're distracting him, he just needs a nap. Finally, I set my baby down next to me. He stood on the floor facing the seat next to me so that I could make a bottle. The man behind me stood up and reached over my seat to pick him up. I immediately leaned forward to pick up baby, saying, "No thank you, I don't need help, please, no thank you." The man pushed me back into my seat while mumbling, "Sweet baby, why baby cry?" I replied very loudly, "No," and quickly picked up my baby. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. I tried to rock my baby to sleep while desperately trying not to lose my cool. As I'm rocking baby, the man behind me reached through our seats to grab my arm, saying, no rocking, you make him cry." I pulled free from him and yelled, "Do not touch me." Again, I thought that'd be the end. I started rocking baby for a second time. This time, the man behind me reached both hands around either side of my seat to hold me in place, saying, no rocking, stop rocking." I am somewhat embarrassed that I completely lost it. Clutching my baby to my chest while struggling to get free of him, it hurt. I hit the call light while screaming, "Let me go, do not touch me, let me go, let me go, let me go." He was still holding me by my arms when the flight attendants came running. I could barely get anything out of the flight attendants. Everyone around us was staring, I was sobbing, and all I could get out was that I could not sit there anymore, and for the love of God, please move me. The man behind me tried to move with me, but I told the flight attendants that I did not know him and he could not come with me. I had a good cry in my new seat, but my baby immediately went to sleep. I was moved to be next to the flight attendant's seat. After calming down, I explained to the flight attendants what had happened. Multiple times, the man that had been behind me got up to try to come back to my new seat, only to be turned around by one of the flight attendants. Towards the end of the flight, one of the flight attendants told me that they'd explained everything to the pilot, and the pilot had called the FBI and local police to escort the man off the flight. I would also be escorted off, as well as everyone around us that had watched everything happen. He cheered as he was escorted off. I had to interview with the FBI and nearly missed my next flight. After my trip was done, I had to fly back going through the same airport. It was stressful and emotional to say the least. Even knowing that he was banned from the airline and the airport, I haven't flown since. To the man that tried to grab my baby from me and then wouldn't let go of me, let's never meet again. There's something uniquely horrifying about being stuck in a metal box thousands of feet in the air with nowhere to go. On top of that, having to take care of a baby and having to deal with someone who just won't stop crossing the line. The feeling of being trapped and unsafe in a situation like this, despite being surrounded with other people, hits even harder. And OP's crash out to the entire thing was completely valid. On her post, though, some commenters pointed out that the man's behavior could be the result of a mental disability. At first, I thought that he's horribly entitled, but it actually sounds like he's mentally challenged. If he can't help grabbing strangers, somebody needs to get him an experienced carer to travel with. It's grossly negligent and potentially dangerous to allow someone like this to travel alone, the commenter said, to which OP agreed with. However, what makes this story even more unsettling is how common it is. Another user replied with her own experience. It was of someone trying to grab her daughter from her arms mid-flight and refusing to back off. They think since we're overwhelmed with our babies that we're vulnerable enough to give in to their creepiness, she said. And honestly, that makes perfect sense too. Whether it's entitlement or a lack of awareness or something more complicated, the outcome is the same. Parents being cornered and pushed past their limits while in one of the most vulnerable positions they can be in. An encounter with Bickford. On a Reddit thread called "Who is the Scariest Person You Have Ever Met?" there was a story from a now deleted user who recalled his chilling encounter with a stranger he met at a Christian mission in Brazil. Like other stories on this video, this one, yet again, is the quiet kind that doesn't instantly reveal its implications. However, the more it progresses, the more everyone realizes how dangerous of a situation OP was really in, and how it's a miracle he escaped unscathed. This post is very long, but I couldn't tell the whole story very well without it being this long. When I was a missionary in Brazil, my companion and I were approached by a seemingly homeless man who greeted us in almost perfect English. Turns out he was an American who had been living in Brazil for about 30 years. His name was Bickford. He had to have been in his late 50s to 60s. It was hard to tell because of his big beard and very unkempt appearance. He feigns interest in what we were peddling and asks for a copy of the Book of Mormon, but is clearly more excited to be speaking English with two Americans. We made up with him a few times to discuss religion, but he would always meet us at the side of the road or some other public, but still secluded place. We had to give weekly reports to the ecclesiastical leader for the local unit about who we were meeting and teaching. After meeting Bickford a few times, we bring him up in our weekly meeting. The bishop and his other leaders instantly know who we are talking about and cautions us to stay away from this guy. Apparently, he's a bit unstable and once or twice a year will start bothering the missionaries. My companion and I can't believe that the bishop is referring to the same person, and we continue meeting with him. That probably should have been the point where they stopped, but curiosity and politeness pushed them forward. I don't know how to adequately describe the creepiness of this guy. Between his disheveled appearance, flat out lying to us, and other small signs, he had a certain sinister vibe. But with nothing concrete to put on our fingers, we continued to speak to him. Occasionally he would run into us right outside of the house we lived in. One night, after talking about his house in the jungle and how nice and wonderful it was out there, he agrees to have us meet him at the side of the road in front of his house so he can guide us down the path to his house. The time arrives and we are waiting patiently by the side of the road, but Bickford is very late. Just as we're about to leave, he arrives and takes us down the path into the jungle. At this time, it's very dark and we're walking through waist-high foliage. This area had roads and cities, but was right next to a large reservoir, and if you left the main roads, could become very isolated and overgrown very quickly. As we walked down this path for what seemed like forever, I kept walking into spider webs with my face and almost losing my shit. I hate spiders, and the ones in Brazil were the stuff of nightmares. Luckily, I carried a small LED flashlight, but it seemed woefully underpowered out there in the jungle. When we finally arrived at his house, my companion and I played it cool, but we couldn't believe what we were seeing. He had led us to a small clearing where there was a wooden cabin that had half collapsed on itself. He said, "Welcome home," and let us inside. There was no electricity, no running water, no utilities whatsoever. We walked in the front door frame, no door, and saw that all the furniture in the house had been destroyed. Literally, someone had concentrated a large amount of effort and time to achieve this level of destruction. Chairs were unrecognizable, and there was trash everywhere. He begins to show us the main room inside the front door. That's when I notice them. Notes in chalk on every square inch of the wooden walls, up the walls, on the ceiling, in a tiny frenzied scrawl. When I train my light on the notes and start to read them, it got real. Most of the notes were variations on "Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop," "I did it again," these with a month and date written next to them, and the piece de resistance, the names of several children with their ages and graphic sexual detail about them. We tried so hard to not mention the notes. We tried so hard to ask him small talk questions about the rotting food on the stove, or the 100 or so rats he kept in his basement. Anything but mentioning the notes. I can't speak for my companion, but I was freaking the f*** out. From glances at each other, I could see that he was at DEFCON 1 as well, and we decided to get the hell out of there. We made some excuse, as it was getting late, that we needed to get home, and he reluctantly offered to show us the way back, on the condition that we would come visit again. As we got out of the house, he suddenly remembers that he knows a shortcut and tells us to follow him. The direction he's trying to lead us is clearly not the way back to the road. It only led deeper into the jungle. We politely declined, and luckily we were able to follow the trail that we had originally made through the underbrush. This time, however, I did not give a shit about the spiders. When we got back onto the road and realized we were safe, we looked at each other as if to say, did that really happen? Once we started talking about what we just saw, I was so terrified that I physically could not speak. Nothing like that had ever happened to me, nor since. I absolutely could not make a sound. I was so scared. My companion called our leaders, who called their leaders, and we ended up moving about a week later, but not before making an entry in our area book, the book that stays in the area listing who had been talked to and who to contact in the area, warning all other missionaries to stay away from this guy. The thing is, OP knew this was going to be hard to believe for some skeptics online. He was prepared to receive backlash for it, which is why he came prepared when he met Bickford following his first encounter with him. I realize the entire ordeal sounds completely cliche, everything about Bickford did. That's why after our second conversation with him, I started recording every time we would meet with my digital camera. I would set it on audio record mode and stick it in my pocket. I'll edit this post with a link once I've uploaded the audio from that night. After that, OP returned with an update and shared the audio clip he had promised. And sure enough, it was just as unsettling as he originally described. The recording is over an hour long and captures different moments from his encounters with Bickford. The audio is heavily distorted since the recorder was in his pocket and brushing against the fabric, but you can still clearly hear Bickford speaking throughout. Looking back, it's not hard to see the points where they should have stepped away. The signs were always there. Bickford's behavior from the get-go and the earlier warnings from other missionaries would have deterred anyone else. But OP chalked his and his friends being naive 19 to 20-year-olds from Utah under the protection of God. Another thing that stood out to a lot of commenters was the fact that despite how disturbing and potentially criminal the encounter was, there didn't seem to be any formal report made. One commenter asked, and none of you informed local law enforcement? OP replied that while he didn't personally contact the authorities, someone in their congregation had a relative in law enforcement who became involved in some capacity. He added, I guess I was too worried about saving myself to think about preventing those awful things from happening to other people. Not making a formal report, regardless of how much it would have actually accomplished, is something I still deeply regret. OP thinks something bad happened to his sister. With most something is wrong posts, it's usually a case of someone sharing a dramatic story that ends up being more clickbait than anything serious. But this is one of those rare times where you wish that were true because of how horrifying the situation is. But it is, unfortunately, completely real. This post comes from a 14-year-old boy who's scared for his and his younger sister's life and trying to make sense of something that feels deeply wrong. He explains that 7 months ago, his younger sister left with their grandmother and was supposedly sent to boarding school for the summer. But even after summer was over, she never returned. He used a throwaway account to share his story and was genuinely afraid of what might happen if it were traced back to him. Every time he asked his parents about her, he was met with vague answers and silence. Naturally, he looked toward Reddit for some answer from people who were actually willing to listen to him. Throw away because this is seriously terrifying. I scope Reddit a lot and I don't know where to go, but I hope I can be helped here. I'm 14 male, I'm American, but I live in Asia, being vague because I don't want this traced back to me if the situation is as bad as it seems. I don't know if I should give some sort of background or anything, but up until about 7 months ago, I lived with my mom, 39, and my dad, 41, plus my little sister, 9. I say was because my sister is no longer here, she's in boarding school. I want to preface this by saying we are not bad kids. We're half white, half Asian. When my grandpa, in dad's side, got sick 4 years ago, we moved here so my dad can take care of him. Me and my sister worked hard to learn the language. Despite her age, she actually caught on better than me, and I was so impressed with her. The issue began with Grandma. She would really look down on my sister, and I love my sister and didn't like it one bit. My mom said it's cultural and I shouldn't make a fuss, but it was hard when Grandma really started making it obvious. She got me clothes, games, etc., but my sis got no attention. I should mention that 4 years ago we lived with Grandpa and Grandma. In that time of me getting spoiled, my sister got reprimanded for everything she did. I swear, it was super unfair, and you wouldn't believe. Just under a year ago, Grandpa passed, and my parents decided we'd stay here since I already speak and read pretty fluently. Grandma spoke to everyone about how rude and unladylike my sister is, and my parents went along with it when I completely think that's wrong. 7 months ago, her and Grandma went out, and my parents said she'd be at boarding school for the summer. Just the summer. After 3 months, I got anxious and asked when she'd be back, and my mom ended up crying at the question. I was talked to by my dad, and he said she loved boarding school so much she didn't want to come back yet. Like, is that how boarding school works? I don't think so. Maybe I've been watching too much TV or reading too much Reddit, but we're in another country, and I swear what they were doing was emotional abuse. Still, it gets worse. After 5 months, I still hadn't gotten any contact. No message, no letters, nothing. And that's when my dad started making her room into his office space. We actually got into a big fight over it, and I ended up with more chores, but he never answered why he was doing it if she'd be back soon. Anyway, it's now been 7 months since that car trip that took my sister away, and the final nail in the coffin hit. I was looking through the attic for my mom and found a box with some of her old stuff, including her phone. Why wouldn't she have her phone? I really just want to know if there's anything I can do. No one will tell me which boarding school she's at. I'm told not to worry about it because I'm a child. I know I'm too young to do much, but if there's anything I can do, please help. When I think about it, I can't stop remembering the way my mom cried that day. It makes me shiver. I've been imagining the worst, and I'd hate if it ended up being something along my mind. Sadly, OP's worst nightmares came true when he realized it wasn't just neglect and abuse his sister went through. It was far more sinister, and once he learned the truth, it permanently changed the way he saw his parents and the environment he grew up in. Hi Reddit, it's been a crazy few weeks, but I absolutely need to update as soon as possible. Sorry my post got locked, and I appreciate everyone who spoke to me via DMs. Sorry to those I couldn't get to, it was a lot. I should get on with the most important of the update, what I finally ended up doing. So thanks to the super community that is Reddit, I was able to get in touch with a few different sources. The least favorite of which was a phone call towards those that help find trafficked children. I knew my family would be investigated and actually went to meet up with another family in that time, so basically, a Redditor close to my age, who I'll keep private, met with me, and she had already shown my story to her family. They ended up letting me stay with them for a bit and made the proper calls to make sure it wasn't illegal. I actually even specified that I wasn't running from home and I'd come back after the investigation. It didn't sit so well with authorities, and I was actually forced to go back home, but it only got stranger from there. I went back home to a completely empty house. Even Grandma was gone, so I was allowed to stay with the other family for the time being. They were extremely kind. For a week, I didn't get any news, and bless her mother's heart, but I was told I had a home here no matter the results. So a few days after a week had passed, I get a call, and it turns out they found my sister. My family had been taken in for questioning and were placed in holding for quite a while. I'm not sure why they didn't tell me this immediately, though. I don't actually know the full story, but my sister was living close, 700 kilometers away. Yeah, nearly a whole day's drive. It wasn't summer school or boarding school or anything like that. My dad sold her to get married. My mom was off the hook as, 1, I still needed a parent, and 2, she wasn't in on it until it was a decent way in. My dad and grandma have been arrested though, and I'm back living with my mom and sister now. I'm still in contact with the Redditor that let me stay with her, and I'll forever be grateful. I have no idea what would have happened if I was around when authorities came knocking. She's my angel. On a more depressing note, my sister doesn't speak much, but she seemed to cheer up after I let her read my post. She said she felt abandoned and alone, among other things, but seeing how I and plenty of strangers gave their hearts for her made her very happy, so thank you all. Sorry for being so vague here, but I'm trying to protect identities. This isn't over by a long shot. There's still things that are going to happen, but I have my sister, and that's all thanks to Reddit. Thank you. It's hard to know how someone is supposed to move forward after something like this, especially at 14 when you're still figuring out the world and the people closest to you go ahead and do something this horrific. OP did post a fairly positive and hopeful update a few months later where he assured people he and his sister were fine. So hey Reddit, I made a post a little while ago about my sister, and thanks to the power of Reddit I got her back. I left the account with no real intention of returning, but about a week ago my sister was feeling down and wanted to read some comments. Holy crap. There's so much going on. The post blew up and we got added to an update Reddit, and it's practically top of the page. I'm actually very embarrassed, but proud, as many Redditors said I should be. About DMs, I am so sorry, but there are hundreds, and starting more than 3 or 4 conversations is already a bit overwhelming with everything else going on. That being said, I'm sure you'd all rather hear about my sister. So first off, there was another investigation, a much bigger one, since everyone in our home are American citizens. I thought I didn't have much family on my mom's side because that's what my dad told us all our lives. Turns out I have an uncle, and we're with him as of 2 weeks ago. My mother, on the other hand, is also awaiting trial as well. I won't lie, some of the Redditors are a little cruel, but understandably so. My mother was complicit, even if she could do minimal to stop it, but she's still my mom, and my dad is still my dad. It hurts that I just lost them in the span of a month. What they did to my sister is unforgivable, and I will likely cut all contact, but losing the people that doted on me since day one is a lot. As suggested, we're starting therapy, and we've already had a first meeting, but it was mostly introductions and getting settled. Nothing of note talked about. My sister gives her heart to all you guys, and things seem to be a little calmer now. More personally, I'm still friends with the lovely girl still in Taiwan, and we're in close contact. She will always be my hero. She's very likely read this update, so I won't embarrass her, but she's got sister status now, and she's well aware of what I do for my sister. Thanks again, Reddit. God, I'm Awful is now feeling pretty good. Love you all. Peace. While this update doesn't tie things up completely and give everyone their happy ending, it does show growth and maturity from a kid who stood up for his sister when no one else would. And that alone says everything. Killer boyfriend. Being skeptical about the person you're dating is actually fair game, especially in this current online dating framework. You don't really know who you're dealing with, and on a much more humorous note, the other person could be a serial killer. In the case of the killer boyfriend thread posted on the Let's Not Meet subreddit, that joke turned into a full-on nightmare when user Mirando93 realized her best friend's boyfriend was a murderer. One who had literally just killed his own great-grandmother hours before hanging out with them like nothing had happened. When I was about 19 or 20, my very best friend in the world was dating this guy. He was really cute, funny, and sweet. I stayed with her at her apartment a lot, and he used to always come over and hang out. He lived with his great-grandmother, who was really super strict. Even though he was 18, she gave him a curfew, and if he was late, she would lock him out or call the law on him. So he always had to be home by at least 10 p.m. Anyway, one night I was at her house and we were drinking and playing cards and stuff. He came running through the door at like 9 p.m. saying he had gotten into a fight. We didn't think anything of it really because he wasn't exactly a golden boy and it wasn't all that surprising. But after about 12 a.m. rolled around and we were like, damn, your grandma is letting you stay out this late? He ended up telling us that she was asleep and had locked him out. Again, we didn't think much of it. Happened all the time. Later on the next day, I ended up going home. My friend called me that night, crying her fucking eyes out, telling me to look on Jail Tracker. I got on there and looked, and underneath his mugshot, it said, murder. I was literally shocked, like, WTF? Who the fuck did he murder? I was just there. Turns out when he came and busted through the door, he had just mangled his great-grandmother to death with a hammer. He sat there and drank with us, played cards with us, and acted like nothing had ever happened. After everyone had left, he ended up telling my friend what he had done. She acted like she was going to run off with him. She went in her room and acted like she was packing her bags, snuck in the bathroom, and called the police. It was really scary and traumatizing for all of us, for real, but especially her. Ended up getting sentenced to like 50 years or something like that. He tried to escape about 4 years after his sentencing, and they added even more time. So I doubt I'll ever be seeing him again. Anyway, that's been years ago, but I randomly stumbled across this sub and it made me think of that. It's one thing to get bad vibes from someone, it's another to find out they committed murder right before sitting down to drink and play cards with you. But the worst part came even later. In a small update posted by OP a few days after the original story, she shared a chilling detail. Despite being in jail, the murderer boyfriend persistently tried to contact her friend even though she kept changing her number. He continued to find ways to reach out and even insisted that once he got out, he'd find her and they'd be together again. She had a hard time finding someone to be with her for a while after that because every time she liked someone, they were afraid to get close to her because he was still so obsessed with her. It's textbook psychopathic behavior turned into a real nightmare. Frogging. We've seen so many internet stories that revolve around strangers entering someone's home uninvited, or maybe even living in another person's living space unknowingly. However, sometimes there's an oddly specific story that becomes hard to ignore. Again, possibly because of the implications of what would happen if that intruder or stranger was not caught in time. Reddit's Let's Not Meet subreddit definitely has some bizarre tales, but this one by Visual Truth 772 takes the cake for being the most fear-inducing. OP basically recalls the time she caught a pale, sickly-looking stranger squatting in her closet in the middle of the night. She was home alone with her little brother and had only accidentally checked it. That's when she saw the man sitting there grinning at her like a maniac. Okay, I want to start by saying this actually happened. This isn't some creepy story or something I made up. I still have trouble sleeping alone because of it. Even now, years later, at 27, I check every closet and lock every door at least 3 times before bed. So yeah, here's why I don't stay home alone anymore. I was 16, almost 17 female, living with my mom and my little brother, Ryan, like 7 at the time. My mom worked night shifts at a nursing home, so I was usually the one watching Ryan when she was gone. Since he was younger, he'd be asleep by 8, and I'd just do my thing. Watch TV, scroll on my phone, eat junk food, typical teenager stuff. We lived in this little 1-story house on the edge of some woods. It wasn't totally isolated, but there weren't many neighbors nearby either. I used to love having the house to myself at night, until all of this happened. So the first time I noticed something weird, it was small. I was in bed around 11 p.m., scrolling through my phone when I heard this shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet on the carpet. I froze. Ryan was asleep. My mom wasn't home. I sat there holding my breath, listening. It was quiet for a few seconds, and then I heard it again, a soft scuffing noise, like someone was moving really slow through the living room. I grabbed my phone and crept out of my room, my heart pounding. I checked the front door, locked. The windows, locked. Nothing looked out of place. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The hall closet was open. Just a crack. We never left that door open, ever. I stood there for a second, my whole body on edge. I wanted to just turn around and go back to my room, but my dumbass decided to check. I pulled the door open fast. Nothing. Just coats and shoes. I remember laughing at myself. I was just being paranoid. Still, I locked the closet door before I went back to bed. A few nights later, I woke up out of nowhere. At first, I didn't know why. Then I realized I could hear breathing. I was laying there completely still, my whole body locked up in fear. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my room. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. I shined it around. Nothing. The room was empty. The closet was closed. I barely slept the rest of the night. After that, I started feeling weird all the time, like I was being watched. Like, whenever I turned my back, someone was just out of sight, peeking around a corner. I told my mom, but she just brushed it off. Then, about a week later, she woke me up after coming home early from work. She looked off. She asked me why the back door was unlocked, and I assured her I'd locked it, and she told me it was unlocked and she just had to lock it. I knew without a doubt that I'd locked it the night before, but I didn't argue. That night, I was on edge. I kept my bedroom door locked and my phone in my hand just in case. I woke up to more breathing and just like that gut feeling that someone's watching you. My whole body went cold. I sat up, barely breathing, and listened. I noticed my closet door was open, which was also weird. I turned on my flashlight just in time to see it swing open another inch. And that's when I saw him. I swear to you, there was a man crouched inside my closet. Skin pale as hell, hair greasy and matted. He was too thin, like he hadn't eaten in weeks, and he was grinning at me. I don't even remember getting out of bed. One second I was staring at him, and the next I was slamming my door shut and running to Ryan's room. Ryan woke up crying as I grabbed him and ran out of the house, my phone already dialing 911. The cops got there fast. They found him still in my closet. Turns out, he had been living in our crawl space for weeks. He had gotten in through a loose vent in the basement and had been sneaking into the house at night, watching us sleep, taking food when we weren't looking. But the worst part? When they pulled him out, they found something tucked behind my coats, a knife. The police said he was probably waiting for the right moment. I try not to think about what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night. I swear this actually happened and it f***ed with me to this day. So, to the man in my closet, let's never, ever meet again. OP mentioned at the start that this incident stuck with her for years. This incident apparently gave her nightmares for years on end, and she was still not over it to this day. She still checks every room before bed and locks every door more than once. Anyone in her shoes would go through a similar experience. In the comments, someone asked if she ever shared the story on a podcast or show, and she confirmed that it's been featured on both. A few people also started speculating about who the man might have been. One user pointed out the eerie similarities to the case of Daniel LaPlante, another man who was found living in someone's home. In that case, the family only escaped because their daughter managed to jump out of a second-story window and call for help. Daniel LaPlante, I believe you're referring to, he was basically living in their home for months and finally seen by the family in the husband's recently widowed wife's wedding dress and a hatchet, and they only escaped because the daughter jumped out of the second-story window to get help. As messed up as that was, he actually did kill a family when he got out of jail in an eerie similar way tried to do with the first family. OP watches 5-year-old brother give CPR. So far, most of the stories we've looked at have centered around strange, creepy, or outright dangerous encounters. But this one, shared by Reddit user I Love John Stewart, stands out for a very different and honestly tragic reason. It is not disturbing because of anything violent or shocking. It is simply upsetting because of how personal and quietly painful it is. There's no big twist to it, just a lot of trauma and heaviness that one kind soul has to carry for trying to be responsible. OP shares the moment they realize their younger brother, who was only 5 years old at the time, had tried to give their dying father CPR. Of course, there was only so much a child that young could do, and their father didn't survive. What has stayed with them is not only the loss, but also the long-lasting emotional effect that moment had on their brother. It's basically a living example of how deeply childhood trauma can root itself. It's a situation no person should ever have to go through, let alone a child. I regretfully watched home security camera footage of when my 5-year-old brother found his dad dead from a massive upper GI bleed thanks to 20 years of alcoholism. He called 911 and attempted CPR like he'd seen in a TV show. Every compression he did was basically a blood fountain, but he kept trying for the 5 minutes it took for medics to get to him. In the 911 call, you could hear him repeatedly telling the dispatcher that his dad was scared of needles, so someone would have to hold his hand if they poked him. He didn't understand that he wasn't going to wake up. Medics pronounced his dad dead on scene, and my brother was sent to the children's hospital where I finally met up with him. He was still in his footy pajamas and was soaked head to toe in blood with a broken hand from the compressions and basically catatonic because he was in such shock. He fought like hell, but as the medical examiner would later tell us, nothing could have saved him. The medics that found them told us it was the worst thing they'd ever seen. They both had to go to therapy over it. He's now 8 and still blames himself because he thinks he didn't do CPR well enough. Thanks to that, we often find him practicing CPR on his stuffed animals so he doesn't fail again. Every dispatcher, paramedic, firefighter, cop, nurse, and doctor involved that night said he was a hero. I just really wish he saw it that way too. The worst part here, echoed in a lot of the comments, is the heartbreaking reality that even if the CPR had been done perfectly, there was very little chance their father could have been resuscitated. As one commenter put it, if you head on over to the EMS sub and search for posts about ROSC or saves, there are some people who talk about how uncommon saves actually are. It is a shockingly low success rate, unfortunately. All we can hope is that OP's younger brother is able to work through this trauma over time because none of this was his fault. He just happened to be caught in the aftermath, and it left him carrying the emotional weight of something far beyond his control. DNA tests reveal their babies were switched at birth. One of the most talked about posts in Reddit history came from a user who shared her relationship struggles in the r/relationship subreddit. At first glance, the post seemed like a fairly typical, if slightly manipulative, example of a relationship in turmoil. But as the updates rolled in, the situation quickly spiraled into something far more bizarre and unsettling. What began as a tense domestic issue eventually unraveled into a full-blown crisis that upended an entire family's life. The user, who went by the name Fully Faithful Wife, explained that she had been blindsided when her husband asked for a paternity test for their daughter. What followed was a deeply emotional and chaotic journey that neither of them could have anticipated. I don't know how it happened, and I haven't been able to stop crying all day. I never cheated. I love my husband. We've been together since college, and he's the love of my life. He's handsome and kind, and while I've slept with 2 other people, both were before we got together. There is no other potential father for our daughter. We were married already and actively trying for a baby. I never cheated. I never would cheat, and I don't know why he took that stupid test because I would never, ever cheat. But it came back negative, and now he thinks he's not her dad. I don't know how to convince him it was a faulty test, and I'm so scared. These past few months, it's like he's become someone completely different from the man I married. He's cold and suspicious. He kept demanding to see my phone and wouldn't tell me why. And I showed him at first, but eventually I told him I wouldn't anymore unless he explained why. He's been distant with our daughter, too. He stays in his office for hours on end, and I don't know what he's doing. I did not cheat. He accused me this morning, saying he's done the test after realizing that our daughter's eyes, brown, wouldn't naturally come from ours, both blue, and that he wanted me to get out of the house. I didn't leave, and he locked me out of our bedroom, and now I'm in my daughter's room. This is terrifying. What should I do? Edit. The specific advice I want is how I can prove I'm innocent and how to make sure this relationship works. I want to keep my family together at all costs. Also, I just had a conversation with my husband. He's out of his room now and we discussed some things. I told him again that I would never cheat and started talking about a list I made of tests I want done, but he told me that he didn't want to hear it right now. We're going to have a longer conversation tomorrow, and he said that he still loves our daughter and he won't try to keep me out of the house or our room for now. I asked him to hug me and he did. I'm scared that I won't be able to convince him. I just want our family to go back to normal. How can I be a good wife and support his needs while proving my innocence? TLDR, my husband confronted me this morning saying our daughter isn't biologically his after a failed paternity test, but I never cheated. So, again, it looks like a fairly typical, albeit painful situation often seen in most strained and unhealthy relationships. The wife claimed she hasn't cheated, but the paternity test said otherwise. From there, everything began to go from bad to worse. Their entire home life and their emotional stability took a hit, and all of it was hinging on the one assumption that paternity tests don't lie. But the next update proved something else entirely. As it turns out, the paternity test was accurate, but the wife hadn't cheated either. What followed was a shocking revelation that went beyond anything either of them could have imagined. She explained the entire situation in detail. Hi everyone. First off, I want to thank everyone who reached out. My original post got so much attention, it was hard to get to everything. But I ended up making a list of plans and tests I wanted to get done. My husband was understandably distrustful of me for a while, but he apologized for the way he acted, which I didn't need, and said he wouldn't try to kick me out of our home. He did say, though, that if every test came back and I cheated, that he was going to go scorched earth. We did a few tests, blood paternity test for him and me and our daughter, and we had an appointment with a chimerism specialist coming up, but that got canceled because, well, some of you guessed it, but my daughter is not biologically mine either. I don't know how this happened, but a police officer came to our house and took our statements, and we're suing the hospital where I gave birth. I don't know what happened to my baby, and that is terrifying. I have my husband back, but my whole world was still upended, and I just wish he'd never taken that stupid test. I've been sleeping in my daughter's room, and I'm so afraid that she's going to be taken away from me, but at the same time, I want to know where my biological daughter is and if she's okay. I pray to God she's okay. My daughter still doesn't know the details, and we've been trying to keep this quiet. The last thing we need is a big scandal. I don't want people who know us to look at her differently. She deserves better than that. She's such a good kid, and she's not some spectacle to be gawked at. If we can find her birth family, I have no idea what we'll do. I guess the best case scenario would be to get a bigger house and all live together, but I don't know if we can afford that, or if they'd go for that, or even if we'll be able to locate them, or if I'm just crazy. This whole situation is crazy. I don't know anyone else who's been in a situation like this. I mean, are there support groups for parents of kids who got mixed up? I Googled and nothing came up. Literally all I'm getting are tabloid articles from trashy magazines that slap the faces of innocent kids on the same pages as celebrity scandals and fiction. How do we tell our daughter? I mean, we can't tell her now. She'll tell the kids at school and then it'll be everywhere, but we have to say something. I don't know what I ever did to deserve this. TLDR, my daughter is not biologically mine or my husband's. To have your entire reality uprooted because of a single unfounded doubt from your partner is something most people couldn't even begin to process. And the worst part is, this isn't even a case of cheating or betrayal in the traditional sense. That almost would have made it easier to understand. There is no one to blame here, and that somehow makes this entire thing worse. It's just a devastating mistake caused by a system that failed them. After discovering that neither she nor her husband were biologically related to their daughter, OP turned to the legal advice subreddit for help. The situation was so rare and complex that even the users there were unsure how to respond. Most simply urged her to hire a lawyer to guide her through this overwhelming legal and emotional mess. She was understandably terrified of losing her daughter, but at the same time, she wanted to know where and how her biological child was. To make matters even more complicated, OP's husband eventually came across the original Reddit thread. He saw hundreds and hundreds of comments criticizing him harshly. While online hate is never okay, what he did was fairly questionable for a man in a loving relationship. In response, he made a Reddit post of his own, hoping to share his side of the story and give people a clearer picture of what he had been going through. So, I don't know how many of you have been down a self-doubt rabbit hole before, but it's not the most logical place to be. It's even less logical when you have the whole damn internet telling you that your wife is cheating and that she's planning to take the house and take you for all you're worth and never really loved you, and you always sort of thought she was too good for you anyway, so you end up seeing everything as a sign of infidelity, and then you get not one but 2 failed paternity tests on your daughter. When COVID happened, I got fat, I got depressed, I stopped feeling like a person. My wife stayed beautiful. She stayed herself. I was sure that she'd made a mistake, that she'd regret being with me. I started getting into some online groups, especially on Reddit, that were full of guys who'd been cheated on, lost custody, lost everything. And when someone said that his tip-off was that he and his wife both had blue eyes and their son had brown, I felt stupid. I did not want to jump to conclusions, but when I made a post about my fears, everyone said that she was cheating. People said not to say anything because she'd use it to hide her cheating and get ahead of me on the divorce. I got the test, and I didn't really think it'd come back negative. Then it did. I didn't want to believe it, but yeah, I pulled back. I felt betrayed. I wanted to be a good husband, but I couldn't shake this. I tried to find evidence of an affair and failed. I got another test. When that one was also negative, I snapped. If you've ever been cheated on, you know what it feels like. When my wife denied it, I got angrier. I just wanted her to leave. I didn't want to go through what everyone seemed to think was going to happen. I didn't want to lose custody of my kid. I didn't want to lose my house. I was scared and angry, and I wanted the truth. I felt like if she couldn't even be honest, there was no getting past this. I took a few hours to calm down. When she came back with a list of tests to take, I tried to keep my cool. I tried to keep my cool for so long. I know I was wrong about the affair, but so was everyone else in my ear. My kid is genuinely not biologically mine. I didn't immediately consider that switched at birth was an option. I've been through a messed up time, and I don't think getting angry one time because I thought my wife cheated and was lying about it makes me a monster. This post doesn't make things any better on the husband's part, but in a strange way, this entire situation may have saved them from an even more painful one later down the line. Still, it's hard to say what the right response would be in a situation like this, if one even exists. And for this couple, the fallout ended up being more existential than about trust.